Welcome to the Challenging Child Podcast, where you'll discover ideas to help change the behaviour of a child who is aggressive, defiant, controlling, or dishonest. Let's join Jill Tree from Stressed Parent.
So we often want to know the answer why our children are difficult or challenging. And the why question isn't often that helpful. However, I trained in a therapy called rhythmic movement training, 10 years ago, something like that. And it was absolutely fascinating. I worked in it for quite a while. I did it primarily to help my own child, my son, but I also worked with other families. And a lot of children just aren't comfortable in their skins. They just don't quite fit their bodies, and their bodies don't quite function as well as they could in the world. It's not that they're not eating and digesting or breathing or their heart's not pumping, the blood around their bodies. It's not that. It's much more subtle. And it's to do with a number of different things, including their senses and something called primitive reflexes. So we have a number of different senses, and we all know touch, taste, sound, smell. But there are two senses that can, if not quite finely tuned, cause sort of disruption in our children's sort of modus operandi, if you like, the way they operate in the world. And one of them is called the vestibular sense, which is our balance. And the other is our proprioception, which is our sense of where we are in the world. And that's really, really important. And I'm going to focus on that for now, because that's a really important one. So let me give you some examples of how proprioception helps us. I'd like you to think about picking up a really heavy box. So you go to prepare to pick up this really heavy box, and you go to pick it, and you bend your knees, and you look after your back, and you pick up this box, and you tip backwards. And we've tipped backwards because the box is empty, and our muscles had sort of done a calculation and worked out how much oomph and how much energy to put into picking up that box. But because it's empty, we sort of go flying backwards. Another example would be a child who drinks a hot chocolate and gets a moustache. So they don't know where the cup ends and their face starts, and they tip the cup too far. And so they get the moustache. Whereas you and I, hopefully, when we drink a hot chocolate or coffee or whatever, we don't get those chocolate moustaches around the top of our lip. So that's proprioception. It's where we are in the world and how we relate to the world. So a child who has poor proprioception might not quite know where their body finishes and something begins. So a child who fidgets on their chair, for example, is just trying to work out where the chair is in relation to their body and where their body is in relation to the chair. So a child who fidgets on the chair, particularly a younger child, a simple little technique is just to give them an upside down box or an upside down laundry basket to pop under their feet, just to help them ground, especially if their little legs are very short and they're not touching the ground, and that just helps them land. And that might help at dinner time or in the classroom. It might help alleviate that squirming and fidgeting. Now, there's lots of reasons why children squirm and fidget, and proprioception is just one of them. So if we think about children and a newborn, there is something called the rhythmic movements of infancy, the rhythmic movements of infancy. And these rhythmic movements are there for a purpose. So think about a newborn baby or a relatively new baby left to lie on their back. They're awake. They're likely to have their arms and their legs sort of wiggling around and sort of randomly moving. And it looks like completely useless, random, out of control movement. But no, it's actually helping their neurological development, their brain development. So a child who isn't given that freedom to move, think about a swaddled child, for example, isn't given that freedom to wriggle and move, may have some limitations in their milestones, in their developmental milestones. Now, one of the most important developmental milestones is crawling. A lot of our families are so proud of their children because they've gone straight from sitting to standing to walking, and they've missed out the crawling. Now, crawling is absolutely fundamental. So if you are taking your child around in a car seat, for example, and you put them in the car and then you come back home, you take the car seat out and you leave the child in the car seat and they're perfectly safe, and so it's a good place for them to be in theory, well, they're missing out on things like tummy time, and tummy time leads to crawling. So let's start off with tummy time. So tummy time is a really important time for a child to start to lift their head up away from the floor and start to develop their neck muscles. It also, when they start to lift their head, they start to look around and they develop their near and far sight, which is really important. And then they start to push themselves up. They might put their hands up in front of them on the floor and they might start to push themselves up, and they're developing their chest muscles. So if your child, for example, can't do the monkey bars in the playground, could be that they haven't got enough upper body strength. So just think back to, did they crawl? Because all these developmental milestones, if they've missed out on them, it's never too late to put them back into the body. So I would encourage you to just check out, no matter the age of your child, you get your 17-year-old crawling. They can do some commando crawling up the stairs. But crawling, get them crawling, because crawling is really, really important. So the reason for that, well, there's a number of different reasons, but one is it develops the connection between our left and right hemispheres of our brain. So we have two hemispheres, two halves of the brain, tiny little bit of connective tissue that joins the two halves of the brain. And the way that connective tissue is developed is through moving and crossing the midline. Now, the midline is an imaginary line that goes through the center of my body. It goes down my nose, over my lips, down the center of my body, in between my legs. That's a midline, an imaginary line. And it's really important in our development, in our children's development, early on, that they cross the midline. And crawling is a diagonal movement. It's the left leg and the right arm as they crawl along. It's a diagonal movement, which means they're crossing the midline. So any sort of diagonal movement is really, really great for your children. So if they can't crawl, maybe they're in a wheelchair, for example, and they can't crawl. Well, if they can manage to tap their left shoulder with their right hand and their right shoulder with their left hand, then that would be a really great replacement for crawling. Or they tap their right knee with their left hand and they tap their left knee with their right hand. That would be a really good replacement for crawling. Crawling develops all sorts of things. So it develops binocular vision, the two eyes working together, binaural hearing, that's the two ears working together. So if we can get children to crawl, then so much the better. But whatever you can put in place, then that's absolutely great, just to get them moving and get the connections going. Crawling on all different surfaces is so important because it helps develop the child's sensitivity, but also for an overly sensitive child, it helps desensitize. So if you think of a child who can't bear labels in their clothes, a child who really can't cope with cooked pepper or courgette, the mushiness of the cooked courgette in their mouth is just too icky, the chances are they're overly sensitive. If we think about a baby, a baby and an infant will start to experience the world by putting things in their mouth. So, it's your worst nightmare, isn't it? There goes a Lego brick into their mouth. But that's how they're learning about the world, with the nerve endings in their mouth and in their tongue. So if your child is not developed their sense and integrated their sense of touch sufficiently, they could be oversensitive to touch. And things like, even the feel of a towel is a challenge. My son, even till quite recently, his job was to empty the dishwasher, and he couldn't touch the cutlery without licking his hands, which is pretty gross, isn't it, when you think about it? However, he was trying to create a barrier between the feel of the metal and his fingertips. So what do we do about that? What do we do about the overly sensitive to touch child? Get them crawling. Get them crawling on different surfaces. So cold tiles, nice fluffy carpet, wet sand, wet grass, tarmac if it's not going to be too painful. And that will start to desensitize them. Now, if you've got an older child, they might not want to do that, but we can do other things. You could get them just playing with some shampoo in their fingers. A baking tray of shampoo, just a little layer of shampoo on a baking tray or on a plate or in a bowl, and then putting some splodges of liquid paint, children's liquid paint, into the shampoo, and then they do swirly patterns. Outside in the summer, children's paint again, you might get them to paint their own hands, paint their arms, Play-Doh, hiding things in rice, and they've got to rummage for those things. Crazy foam in the bath. I don't know if you can get crazy foam anymore. Crazy foam was a thing when I was a child, but if you can't get crazy foam, then shaving foam. Anything that's got a real tactile feel to it, and they get acclimatized and used to it, it's going to help them with their oversensitivity to the sense of touch. Going back to crawling, however, crawling also helps with proprioception. If you think about the pressure of your hands and your knees on the ground, you're getting proprioceptive feedback. Yes, the ground is pushing up into your knees. If you're on a gravelly first surface, you've got all these bits of gravel sticking into your knees. You're getting that feedback. You're getting the weight of your hands and the weight of your shoulders going through your arms and into your hands onto the ground. That's proprioceptive feedback. So a child who, when you give them a pencil, and they either press too lightly so you can't read it, or they press too hard so they break the pencil lead, has probably got poor proprioception. So again, get them crawling, get them doing some proprioceptive activities. So what would that look like? Well, a child who's got poor proprioception may struggle with throwing and catching a ball. For example, they might not be able to throw far enough. And it's not that they haven't got the power, it's that they haven't got the ability to work out how much oomph to put it in the ball to get it over to you. Conversely, they whack you with the ball and it really hurts. They're putting too much effort in, and they're not able to work out how much effort to get the ball from them to you. So one thing I would suggest you do with them is to get them with a ball, just throwing it in front of them, and almost in like a sort of an arc, where they throw it just a little arc from one hand to the other. You could even if that's too hard, just tip it from one hand to the other. Okay, or even a bean bag, just tipping a bean bag from one to the other, just drawing a little arc in front of their chest. And then that can get bigger and bigger and bigger. Other things for proprioception would be those stretchy bands, those exercise bands for building muscles. But instead of just trying to build muscles with the child, we're just trying to get them to stretch the band, or a scarf. A scarf might even be better because a band might be too strong for them. A scarf would be better actually. To stretch the scarf out to the width of their arms, so they get a proprioceptive feedback. They've got their arms out like a T with the scarf in each hand, and they're making a T with their arms, and they feel that stretch in the scarf, a long scarf. Then they're getting some feedback for where their arms start and end. And this is where they start to really get this feedback into the body. Another one would be with the scarf, they have one foot on the scarf and they're pulling up. They might be standing and they're pulling the scarf with their hand, and then they're getting a connection between their feet and their hands, so their upper and lower body. Now this might sound a bit like, really? Do children really not know that their hands and their feet belong to them and they're connected? Yes, really. Unfortunately, yes, really. So the child who gets from one classroom to another by sort of holding and sliding down the wall of the corridor, that's the sort of child who really has poor proprioception and is looking for security from that wall. So yes, this is a real thing, and we can all benefit. We can all benefit from improving our proprioception. Another exercise to do is snow angels. So this is a really great one, again, to develop crossing the midline, but also the upper body and lower body and the left and right of the body. So snow angels is that motion where you're lying in the snow. We don't need any snow, that's good news. But pretend you're lying in the snow and you're making angels. So you're lifting your arms up and down, sort of like wings going up and down, and your legs at the same time opening and closing in a V. So that's a snow angel. Children could probably do the snow angel absolutely fine. Test them out and see. If they can't, well, then they start with arms only, maybe one arm at a time. Can you lift your right arm, keep it nice and straight, and lift it up to your ear and take it back down? Oh, you can do that. And can you do that with your left arm? Oh, yes, that's brilliant. You can do that. Can you do both arms? Oh, lift your arms, keep them nice and straight up to both ears and back down. Yeah, pointing your hands up. Get them to lie on the floor. You need to lie on the floor on their backs to do this. Hands up, pointing up behind your head and back down again. Right, that's brilliant. Can you do your leg? Take your left leg out and point it to the side and back into the center. And you take your left leg out to the side and back into the center. Brilliant. Okay, can you do both legs? Yes, you can. Fantastic. So then if they're able to do that, fantastic. If not, get them to build up to it over a period of time. It might take a week, practicing it for a minute or two every day. It might take a bit longer. Then you're going to get them to do the diagonals, which is the tricky part. This is the tricky part. Adults can't do this. So don't worry if your child can't do it. But when they get to do it, then that's going to really help their brain development and their proprioception. So we want the left leg to come out. The left leg goes out and the right arm comes out. Okay, so we're doing a diagonal where the right arm goes out to the side and up to above their head, and the left leg is going out. So you just would tap their arm and their left leg, their right arm and their left leg, tap, tap. And you take them out to the side and bring them back in again. Great, you can. Or, oh no, that's okay. You're going to practice that, because I struggled with that as well. And I practiced and now I got good at it. Or you might not be so good at it. You might get your child to test you and you can't do it. And actually, that's a really good lesson. That's a really good lesson for a child to see an adult struggling with something. Okay, so maybe you pretend that you can't do it if you can do it. Okay, let them try it out on you as well. So that is proprioception and neurological development through movement and crawling. Any sort of movement, dancing, running, skipping, jumping, any sort of movement is good for us. We just don't do enough of it, do we, in society? Our children are taken to school in their cars, they're stuck in their desks. It's not a natural state for us to be so still. So I'm going to get you to go out dancing, do some dancing in the kitchen, have some fun with it. Look at your child, notice whether you think they might have some poor proprioception. Try these things out anyway, because it can do no harm. It can only do good. And the last thing I'm going to suggest is when your child has finished doing their proprioception activities, their ball throwing and they're stretching their scarf and their snow angels, get them to hang upside down. They can hang up, or if you've got a climbing frame, they can hang upside down. They could hang their head over the edge of their bed upside down. They could do a handstand or a headstand and be upside down. Watch the television hanging off the sofa upside down. It sounds bizarre, but this is fantastic. And children often know what their bodies need. Our bodies have wisdom, and particularly our children know what their bodies need. If they want to pretend being a cat until they're 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, let them. It's gonna serve a purpose. So let them. And hanging upside down, what does that do? It stimulates something called the vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve in the body that calms us. It stimulates what's known as the parasympathetic nervous system, which has a calming effect on us. And we all need to be calmed. So not only should your child hang upside down, but I'm going to suggest you do some hanging upside down too. Now, you might not want to hang off the climbing frame, but a bit of downward dog from yoga and Pilates, you're just making like a V shape with your body. So your hands are on the floor, your feet are flat on the floor, as flat as possible. Your bum is in the air, your head is pointing down towards the floor. All the blood is going to your brain, feeding your brain. And hold that there for a minute or two, downward dog. If you've got blood pressure that's low, then just be very, very careful how you get up. But your body will start to thank you. So go out, have fun, dance yourself silly, and then do some upside down, downward dog. Till the next podcast.